Summer, 1969. Near Camp Eagle in I-Corps, you step off the trail into wet green shade. The enemy isn't firing, but something is already feeding. And if you think this was just jungle discomfort, you're about to hear what took men out of the fight without a single shot. In this video, we're breaking down the 4 worst leech and parasite encounters American troops kept running into in Vietnam. Leeches that made you bleed for hours. Bites that turned into fevers that didn't quit. Mosquito-borne malaria that could break a platoon's rhythm. And the parasite surgeons saw in the worst, late-arriving wounds. Stay with me, because each one forced units to adapt in ways most people never hear about. First, you need to understand a rule in Vietnam. If the ground is wet, something lives in it. And sooner or later, it finds you. What hits you first is how quickly leeches become routine. You're moving through brush after a rain. Leaves hang low. Your sleeves are soaked. And you're constantly brushing your uniform like you're wiping off ash. But they still get inside. A veteran later recalled 2 ways: a cigarette or bug spray. That was the field method: touch heat or chemical to the leech and it releases. Because if you just rip it, it can tear and keep bleeding. The saliva does that. It numbs the bite, then thins your blood. You look down and see it too late, a dark swelling under your shirt or behind a knee. Then the sudden warm line of blood. Unit journals and medical notes didn't treat it as a dramatic injury, but they recorded the consequence: constant small wounds, constant itching, constant distraction. And the worst part was psychological. Leeches made you feel dirty even when you were doing everything right. Here's what most people miss. On point, you took it harder. The lead man brushed through the vegetation first, and he paid for it. And once you realize the jungle is willing to drink you dry one mouthful at a time, you start noticing the next problem. Because down in the Mekong Delta, it isn't one leech at a time. It's the whole ground moving. Now you rotate south, 1968 into 1969. 9th Infantry Division country. Rice paddies, dikes, canals, and water that never really leaves your boots. You're waiting for hours. Sometimes waist deep. Sometimes slower because the mud grabs your legs like it wants to keep you there. Leeches love that world. They don't just drop on you. They climb. They find the soft places. They wedge under blouse trousers and inside socks. And when you finally stop, you find them by the blood you didn't feel. One soldier described looking down and seeing a big OL bloody spot and said it would just bleed forever. That's not poetry. That's anticoagulant at work, and it means your little bite turns into a steady leak when you're already exhausted. Now stack the second problem on top of it, your feet. After a long day wet, the skin goes pale and soft. It rubs raw where the boot flexes. Then it cracks. Then it gets infected. Army medical logs and dermatology reports called immersion injuries and skin infections some of the biggest non-combat threats to infantry readiness. Out there, that meant a man limping or falling out of the line or getting pulled off patrol. And it did something worse than pain. It slowed units down in terrain where being slow could get you killed. So leeches weren't just gross. They were a morale weapon the environment fired every day. And that forces a hard truth. If the jungle can get inside your uniform, it can get inside your blood. Because the next threat doesn't leave a bite mark you can point to. It leaves a fever. A few weeks later, you're back in the highlands and valleys where night falls fast. This is where malaria becomes the real enemy you can't see. Dusk comes, and with it the thin whine of mosquitoes around your face and ears. You pull your net tight. You slap exposed skin. You take the pills you're told to take. And still, men go down. Medical reporting during the war showed malaria clustering heavily in combat arms, especially infantrymen working in the field. It wasn't just a sickness, it was a cycle. Chills, fever, exhaustion, and the kind of weakness that makes you fear you won't make the next movement. A Navy corpsman who served with Marines in 1968 remembered it plainly: 104 fever, shaking chills. That's not a bad night. That's a medical emergency when you're hours from real care. Here's where it turned deadly. Malaria didn't always announce itself early. Some men pushed through the first signs, trying not to be the guy who quits. Then the fever spiked. Then the confusion hit. Then it became a medevac problem. And every time a helicopter lifted a malaria patient out, the rest of the unit learned the same lesson. The jungle wasn't just trying to scare you. It was trying to thin your numbers. So by now you've fought what you can see and what you can't see. But there's one more parasite story that stayed with the men who treated the war up close. Because it wasn't just what crawled on the outside. It was what lived inside people, waiting for a wound to open the door. Now we're in a hospital world, late 1960s, northern provinces, and the big casualty routes near places like Dong Ha. A Navy doctor later described operating on Vietnamese casualties who arrived days after being hit. The abdomen was infected, the bowel was torn, and then he saw something he said he'd never forget. Worms moving about freely in the abdominal cavity. He explained the plain reality. Parasites from bad water and food can live quietly in the intestines. But when a missile wound breaks the gut open, those worms don't stay contained. That's the part civilians don't picture when they think of battlefield surgery. Not just blood, not just shrapnel. Living things where they should never be. The same doctor also recalled seeing maggots in older wounds on local casualties and noted why it was rare in American wounded U.S. Evacuation was often fast enough that flies didn't have time to turn an open wound into an infestation. What happened next surprised even experienced medical staff. The war's medical race wasn't just against bleeding. It was against biology and time. And that changes how you think about Vietnam's non-combat threats. They weren't side stories. They were part of the battlefield. Because when leeches and infections and fevers start stacking up, you're not just tired. You're worn down. And that's exactly when the enemy wants you. So when Vietnam veterans still talk about leeches and parasites, it isn't because they forgot the firefights. It's because the jungle never stopped fighting them, even in silence. It fought their sleep with itching. It fought their strength with fever. It fought their feet with water and rot. And it fought their morale by reminding them, day after day, that the ground itself was hostile. For the men who carried rifles, and for the medics and surgeons who carry them afterward, that's part of what made Vietnam different. Not just the enemy you could shoot at, but the one you couldn't.